Now the real fun begins. Let's wrap up this series on focus. In Focus Part 1, I covered the very basics on getting sharp focus before you hit the record button. Focus Part 2, I covered autofocus and some different ways cameras handle this. In Focus Part 3, I showed you how to set your aperture to maintain better focus when things move around. If you haven't watched those 3 episodes, please do so first so you can follow. So here we are. By now you should be able to turn on your camera, focus on your subject, and set some sort of aperture giving you a depth of field that makes sense for what you're filming. As I mentioned in earlier episodes, the bigger the aperture number, the smaller in the whole lens is, meaning the least amount of light will be coming through the lens. That means if you set your aperture to its highest number, it's going to be nearly impossible to have enough light to see anything. But not to worry, the setting on your camera you need to adjust is ISO. This tells the sensor in your camera how much light is coming through the lens you want to record. A really low ISO setting like 50 says you have a crap ton of light. Really high ISO setting like 125,000 says you have almost none. As you move this ISO setting higher, you'll get more noise and more graininess in your shots. Depending on your camera, you don't have to really worry too much about this while filming unless you get into ISO settings above 1600, 3200. And if your ISO setting is really high, to see the image, that's a clue to you. Add more light. Okay, let's assume I have enough light and I set my aperture on my lens to say 4.0. That should give me enough wiggle room forward and backward to shoot myself as I sit in this chair and flail my hands around. At this setting, I could see when I set the ISO to 100, it looks properly exposed. In other words, it's not overly blown out with light or overly dark. So I hit the record button and away I go. Now on the side, I would like to move about a bit more. I'll be moving a couple of feet forwards and backwards, and I don't have someone behind that camera to change the focus as I move about. So I crank up my aperture so I'll have a deep depth of field or more in focus and a lot more room for me to move forward and backward. This makes the whole lens smaller, which is less light. So I need to tell the camera it needs to be able to process more of the light coming into the lens. So I set my ISO to a higher number. I see that looks good, everything is framed well, and I focused on my subject. I hit record and away I go. Okay, now what happens when you need to follow someone around or move the camera in and out, but you'd like a blurry background because that looks cinematic for the shot? Now you're gonna have to adjust the focus while you're filming like this. Let's first take the easiest method of focusing while you shoot a scene. You may have heard of an actor hitting their mark. This is simply an X on the floor. It's a piece of tape that the actor, upon entering the scene, is supposed to walk to. Now, when you set your camera to film a scene, you get someone, like your actor, to stand on this X. You set your focus to the desired aperture and ISO. Now the actor goes out of the scene, you call action, and the actor walks into the scene back onto the X spot. That's called the actor hitting the mark. Make sense? Now let's say your actor is going to enter the scene, say some dialogue closer to the camera, then move further back away from the camera and say some more dialogue. Now your actor has 2 marks during the scene. These are both marked with an X on the floor. Since the first mark and the second mark are at a different distance from the lens, then you as the camera person must be able to set the focus on the first mark and reset the focus on the second mark, or your actor will go out of focus. There's all sorts of gadgets for your camera to help you with this. They are all basically came down to the same thing. Here's the focus ring on my lens. First I focus on the actor on the first mark on the floor, then 2 pieces of tape here with a mark on each. That's mark 1. Now I move the actor to the second mark, focus on them again, then put another piece of tape with a mark on it. That's mark 2. Now I place the camera, focus on mark 1 and call action. My actor comes into the scene, he says his line. Then he moves back to his second mark. As he does this, I turn the focus ring on the lens to the second mark and the actor says his next line. perfect focus on my actor in both shots. This is called pulling focus, but all you need to know is that's how you do this. The only way this gets more complicated is if you have to reposition the camera, as the actor's mark is not only forward and backward, but also side to side. That means you'll have to use your tripod to not only pan the camera as the actor moves from one position to the other, but also adjust the focus. In this case, you can also set marks like you did for your focus ring on your tripod head, so you know where the first place you shoot is and how far to pan the camera to the second place to keep the actor in frame. Another use for this focus ring marking system is what is called rack focus. You have actor A talking on mark A. Actor B is out of focus, located in mark B behind or in front of actor A. Well, it's the same thing. You set your focus on actor A, mark the line up on your tape, set the focus on B and mark it again. When actor A talks, your focus ring is mark A. When it's time for actor B talk, you move the focus ring to mark B. Depending on the scene and effect you want, you can do this smoothly or quickly. Easy squeezy with some practice. The same is true when you're panning left and right with these actors true. If your scene has 3 or 4 or more actors, this can get really complicated. You're gonna have to do some serious practice before you pull off a shot like this. You can also just say, to hell with it, and film each actor separately and cut to each of them in post. You can also film each actor with their own camera and cut to these later. You can also have just one mark and each actor goes to that mark, delivers their dialogue, and you don't have to move the focus at all. But pulling focus like this is a skill you should achieve as it makes things look delicious. The way you practice this is by setting up objects in a room that are stationary and practice marking and moving the ring focus between these objects. You can also get so good at this that it takes you way longer just to do the setup than to operate the focus ring. And this is why you see these rabid comments from people who say, "Thou art shall always use manual focus." They're skilled pros. They're so good at using the focus ring that waiting for the camera to autofocus seems like forever to them. And they couldn't imagine how a person could film like this using autofocus. Okay, now comes the hardest part of handling focus. If you have a subject, animal, or object that is constantly moving around, there's no way you can handle the focus using the mark system. There is no mark. They're constantly at a different distance from the lens. Well, now you're gonna have to learn how to handle the focus ring on your lens like an expert. Most people die at this point because they think it's too hard to learn. And this is where I call bullshit. If you learned how to steer a car, you can learn how to steer a focus ring on a lens. It just takes practice. And if you're not willing to practice, then you'll never be good at follow focusing. Actually, without practice, you'll never be good at anything. Here's how you learn to follow focus like an expert. Put your lens on your camera, set a nice aperture to start, let's say 8. Then go follow something around like your mom or your dog or your cat. Practice moving the ring left and right until you get a feel for how much you need to steer the lens to keep it in focus. When you get really good at this, set the aperture to 4. Now go follow something and get really good at this. Although it's rare you would film something like this, if you're feeling really adventurous and your lens goes down that far, set the aperture low to something like 1.8 and follow something around. It will be nearly impossible, but it will increase your ability to follow focus. Remember, at 1.8, your depth of field is about 1/8 of an inch, so don't feel bad about the results. Now, when you're feeling really cocky, do what I call the helicopter drill. Have someone get one of those little helicopters, fire it up and fly it around. Your job is to keep it in focus and follow it. Remember to set the aperture at a high setting like 8, or you'll feel like you can never do it. Then 4, then 2. Finally, let me give you a few tips on this. When you're practicing this, do not worry about how shaky the camera or the shot ends up being. You're only practicing keeping things in focus. When you're really good at doing that, then you can get stabilizer rigs that contain follow focus systems so you can shoot stable footage and follow focus at the same time. The follow focus is simply a wheel on the side of a stabilizer that allows you to adjust the focus ring while you're moving around. But even with these, you still need to know how to focus while things move. There's no free ride just because you got a stabilizer with a follow focus. Also, you should be practicing all these things I covered together. You figure out how you will be pulling focus for the scene you are shooting. Is it a single focus shot, one where you use marks, or something where you need to follow focus? Then you set your aperture and your ISO to suit. Adding more or less light is needed and shoot the shot. If you practice, you'll get really good and you'll know what you're signing up for when you're designing a shot. Do you really need to have 5 people in the room with a really shallow depth of field pulling focus and panning the camera to each of them? Good luck. Does this really add to the scene you are trying to shoot, or is it actually distracting to the viewer, the main point? Wouldn't it be easier to film all 5 of the actors in the room from far away, establish what is happening, then film each actor delivering their lines? These are the decisions you make when filming a scene. And guess what? You just entered into a whole new field of film production called blocking, which is defined as the arrangements made for the composition of a scene, especially the placement and movements of actors and cameras. I hope this series on focus has helped you make better films, and thanks for watching. When you get a stabilizer rig, holy smithereens, that would have been bad.